When the letter came in the mail, I almost tossed it aside with the rest of the junk. The envelope was plain, no logo, no hint of importance. Just my name, Ethan Walker, written in a neat but old-fashioned script. Something about it made me pause. I tore it open while leaning against the chipped counter of my small apartment kitchen, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. The words on the page hit me like a punch to the chest. As the sole heir of the Walker estate, you are now the legal owner of 142 acres off Maple Hollow Road, Willow Creek, Texas. My grandfather's land. I hadn't set foot there in over 20 years. Not since I was 12 and my parents pulled us away to chase opportunities in the city. My grandfather, Robert Walker, had stayed behind, stubborn as the red oaks that lined the property. He raised cattle, fixed fences with his bare hands, and lived out his days on that soil until the end. I didn't cry when I read the letter. I just stood there, staring at the words, feeling the weight of legacy settle on my shoulders. That land wasn't just dirt. It was roots. It was the last piece of my family's story that hadn't been paved over by strip malls and subdivisions. A month later, I loaded my beat-up Ford with boxes, tools, and a stubborn determination I didn't even know I had. I drove back to Willow Creek, windows down, the scent of cedar and hay drifting in on the breeze as I hit the county roads. But something was different. Where my memory painted wide open pastures and cattle grazing, I now found manicured lawns, new houses, and the rigid sameness of planned communities. My grandfather's land was still there, untouched, wild in its beauty, but it was now surrounded by a sprawling HOA development called Maple Hollow Estates. And they weren't happy to see me. The first neighbor I met was Karen Dorsey, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. She pulled up in a spotless white Lexus SUV, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the late afternoon sun. She didn't smile. "You must be the squatter?" she asked, voice sharp as broken glass. I set my box down on the porch of the old farmhouse. "I'm Ethan, Robert Walker's grandson. This is my land." Her lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "That's funny. We've been maintaining this area for years. The HOA has rules, you know. Standards. You can't just camp out here." I bit back a laugh. "I'm not camping. I'm home." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." That was my introduction to Karen. And in that moment, I didn't realize just how far she'd go to push me off the land that was mine by blood and law. But I had something she didn't know yet, something that would turn her world upside down. Because when I signed those papers, I didn't just inherit the land. I inherited her neighborhood. The farmhouse was worn down but sturdy, its bones strong despite peeling paint and sagging shutters. I spent my first week clearing brush, fixing leaks, and sweeping dust from rooms that smelled faintly of cedar and memory. It felt good, real. My hands ached each night, but the kind of ache that made you proud. Still, Karen made sure I couldn't settle in without a fight. The first letter arrived tucked under my windshield wiper. "Notice of violation. Your property does not conform to Maple Hollow HOA landscaping standards. Please remove weeds, mow lawn, and repaint structures within 14 days." I crumpled it and tossed it into the trash barrel. This wasn't HOA land. This was Walker land. 2 days later, Karen herself marched down my gravel driveway, clipboard in hand, her perfume cutting through the smell of hay. "Mr. Walker," she said, emphasizing my name like it was a curse. "This property is an eyesore. It drags down the value of our homes." I wiped sweat from my brow, leaning on the shovel I'd been using to dig out an old fence post. "Pretty sure my grandfather didn't build this place to boost property values, Karen." Her smile was tight, brittle. "The HOA has standards, and everyone complies. Everyone except me," I said. The way her face hardened told me this was war. That night, the floodlights from the development shone brighter than usual, as if the neighborhood itself was glaring at me. Trucks honked when they passed, and more violation letters appeared on my porch. But the thing about growing up in a family like mine, you learn to stand your ground. One afternoon, I drove into town to visit the county records office. I wanted to see exactly what my grandfather had left me. The clerk, a gray-haired man named Jim, shuffled through dusty files and pulled out a thick folder with Walker Estate written across the top. "Looks like your granddaddy never sold a thing," Jim said. "Matter of fact, the HOA built half their subdivision on land that technically belongs to the Walker Estate." I blinked. "Wait, you're saying Jim tapped a map with his pen. These parcels right here, they're under your deed. The developers either overlooked it or thought no one would notice. But by law, kid, you're not just a landowner. You're their landlord. I left the office with a copy of the map in my hands, my pulse racing. Suddenly, every smug smirk, every threat from Karen replayed in my mind. Only this time, I was the one with power. That evening, I stood on my porch as Karen pulled up again, Lexus gleaming under the setting sun. She stepped out with her clipboard and that same condescending tilt of her chin. "Mr. Walker," she began, "you're officially on notice. If you don't." I cut her off, holding up the deed map. "Funny thing, Karen. Turns out you've been trespassing. This land, this neighborhood, a good chunk of it is mine, which means you don't own me. I own you." For the first time, Karen's perfect facade cracked. And that's when the real battle began. The news hit Maple Hollow Estates like a thunderclap. One day I was the outsider, the squatter on the edge of their pristine lawns. The next, I was the legal landlord of half their development. And nobody took it harder than Karen. She called an emergency HOA meeting in the clubhouse, a polished building with glass walls, leather chairs, and a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a Vegas casino. I showed up with my boots still caked in mud, carrying the deed folder like a weapon. The room was packed. Neighbors who once glared at me now looked uneasy, whispering behind manicured hands. Karen stood at the front, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she tried to keep control. "Residents," she said, her voice sharp. "This outsider believes he has rights over our community. But let me assure you, the HOA will not bow to intimidation." I stepped forward, laying the map on the table so everyone could see. "This isn't intimidation. This is county record. My grandfather never sold the land. That means these homes, your driveways, your fences, sit on Walker's soil. You don't have to like me, but the law says you pay rent." To me, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces turned pale. Others, those sick of Karen's iron grip, hid small, almost guilty smiles. Karen's face flushed crimson. "This is absurd. You can't possibly think." "I don't think, Karen. I know." I leaned in just enough for the whole room to feel the weight of it. "You've spent weeks trying to shove me off my land. But here's the truth. I'm not going anywhere. You want to play by rules? Fine. But they're mine now." The tension was electric. That night, retaliation came fast. Trucks blocked my driveway. Someone slashed my tires. A dead squirrel was nailed to my fence post with a note, "Leave before it gets worse." But I'd spent my childhood watching my grandfather fight droughts, floods, and debt collectors who wanted to strip him bare. I wasn't about to run because of a few petty stunts. So, I pushed back harder. I hired an attorney, sent formal notices to every homeowner, and demanded the HOA start paying rent or negotiate a buyout. The attorney's words were clear. "Ethan, the law's on your side. They either deal with you, or this whole development's in breach." Karen exploded. She showed up at my gate one evening, her sunglasses off, eyes burning with fury. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You're ruining everything we built. This neighborhood was perfect until you showed up." I didn't flinch. "This land was perfect long before your neighborhood existed. You built on my family's soil without asking. And now you're angry because you lost control." For a moment, she stood there trembling, fists tight, like she might lunge at me. But then her face twisted into a cold smile. "You'll regret this, Ethan Walker. I'll make sure of it." And with that, she stormed off into the night. I knew then the climax hadn't peaked yet. The real showdown was still coming, and it would determine not just who controlled the land, but who controlled the future of Maple Hollow itself. The showdown came quicker than I expected. Karen, true to her word, filed a lawsuit on behalf of the HOA, claiming I was illegally asserting ownership. She strutted into the county courthouse with her high-priced lawyer in tow, her pearls gleaming like armor. She thought she could bury me under paperwork, bleed me dry with legal fees, and win by default. But I wasn't fighting alone. My attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Marissa, had been itching for this battle. She walked into that courtroom with boxes of evidence, old deeds, surveys, tax records, all signed and sealed in my grandfather's name. The hearing was brutal. Karen glared at me across the aisle, whispering furiously to her lawyer as witnesses spoke. But the facts didn't bend. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and a reputation for hating HOA drama, flipped through the files slowly, methodically. Finally, he looked up. Ms. Dorsey, the documents are clear. The Walker estate owns this land. The HOA has no authority to dictate terms on Mr. Walker's property. In fact, by building without proper agreements, your association is operating in violation of county law. Karen's face went pale. In short, the judge continued, Mr. Walker is not only within his rights to reside on his property, he is legally entitled to compensation as the rightful landlord. The gavel slammed. Case closed. The ripple effect was immediate. Homeowners who once bowed to Karen now lined up at my gate, suddenly polite, asking about new rental agreements. Some wanted to negotiate buyouts. Others admitted they'd been bullied by the HOA for years and were relieved someone finally stood up to her. And Karen? She tried to rally her troops, but her grip was broken. Within weeks, the HOA board voted her out as president. She moved away not long after. Rumor had it her marriage cracked under the stress, her Lexus repossessed when debts piled up. For a woman who thrived on appearances, losing her kingdom was the ultimate humiliation. I stayed. I rebuilt the farmhouse, repaired the barn, and planted a new garden in honor of my grandfather. The land breathed again, free from the suffocating grip of manicured perfection. Some neighbors chose to leave, but many stayed. Without Karen's tyranny, Maple Hollow began to feel less like a prison of rules and more like a community. Kids rode bikes down gravel paths again. Dogs barked without fear of fines, and for the first time, I felt welcome. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the fireflies spark in the tall grass. My land, my family's legacy. I thought about Karen, about how she raged, schemed, and ultimately fell. She wanted control, but in the end, she forgot the simplest truth. Land isn't just about property lines. It's about history, blood, and the stubborn resilience of those who refuse to let go. And me? I wasn't just the grandson of Robert Walker anymore. I was Ethan Walker, landowner, landlord, and the man who reminded an entire neighborhood that roots run deeper than rules.